"Why is there a gray stain under that silver flower?" the little girl asked. Nobody answered her. The wedding orchestra was still playing when 8-year-old Ava Brooks suddenly rushed forward and slammed both hands into the top tier of the 7-foot wedding cake. White frosting exploded across the polished floor. Guests gasped. A woman dropped her champagne flute. Billionaire Ethan Caldwell froze with the cake knife still in his hand. The silver sugar flower rolled across the stage and stopped against his shoe. "She ruined it!" someone shouted. Victoria Langford, the bride, went pale for half a second before forcing a smile back onto her face. "Security," she said sharply. "Please remove her." 2 guards moved immediately. Ava did not run. She did not cry. She pointed at the broken cake. "Don't let him eat that part." The room fell silent again. Ethan lowered the knife. He looked at the little girl, then at the ruined cake, then at the silver flower lying beside his polished black shoe. Nobody understood why she seemed more afraid of that flower than of being thrown out. Before anyone understood what the little girl had just exposed, the day had begun very differently. 3 hours earlier, the Grand Crescent Hotel looked like something from a magazine cover. Crystal chandeliers glowed above rows of white roses. Servers carried silver trays through hallways lined with marble. Outside, black SUVs arrived every few minutes as guests stepped onto the red carpet. In the service corridor behind the ballroom, Sarah Brooks adjusted the cuffs of her uniform and checked the time on her phone. She had worked double shifts all week for this wedding. Missing a paycheck was not an option. "Stay where I can see you, okay?" she told her daughter. Ava nodded. She was sitting on an overturned supply crate near the kitchen entrance with a paper cup of lemonade in her hands. Unlike most children, Ava rarely fidgeted. She watched. She noticed things. Sometimes too many things. Sarah kissed the top of her head and disappeared through the swinging kitchen doors. Ava remained alone. The sounds of preparation echoed around her. Rolling carts, clinking dishes, the distant sound of a string quartet rehearsing inside the ballroom. A few minutes later, a pastry chef pushed the wedding cake past her on a stainless steel cart. Ava stared as it rolled by. 7 tiers, white frosting, fresh flowers, and near the top, a silver sugar flower unlike all the others. The chef kept walking. Ava almost looked away. Then something bothered her. She could not explain why. Maybe it was because every flower on the cake faced outward except one. The silver flower near the top was turned inward, almost as if it were marking something. She stood and took a few steps after the cart. Not enough to be noticed, just enough to keep looking. The cake disappeared into a preparation room beside the ballroom. The door remained slightly open. Ava should have gone back to her crate. Instead, she noticed another detail. A woman entered the room only seconds later. Not a chef. Not hotel staff. Victoria Langford, the bride. Ava could see only part of the room through the narrow opening. Victoria glanced over both shoulders before stepping inside. Then she closed the door almost all the way. Almost. Not completely. Ava stopped walking. Something about that made her uneasy. People who belonged somewhere usually left doors open. People hiding something usually checked behind them first. A few moments later, the hallway became quiet. The orchestra stopped practicing. The kitchen noise faded. And through the small gap in the door, Ava saw Victoria reach into her purse and pull out a tiny glass vial no bigger than her thumb. Ava did not move. The narrow gap in the door remained open just enough for her to see part of the room. Victoria stood beside the wedding cake, her white garment bag hanging from a hook nearby. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the bride unscrewed the cap of the tiny glass vial. Ava expected her to pour something. Instead, Victoria dipped the tip of a small decorating brush into the liquid and leaned toward the top tier. The little girl could not see exactly where the brush touched the frosting. She only saw Victoria's arm block part of the cake and the silver flower disappear behind her shoulder. A second later, footsteps echoed down the hallway. Victoria immediately stepped back. The vial vanished into her purse. By the time a pastry chef entered the room, the bride was smiling. "Just checking on everything," she said lightly. It's beautiful. The chef laughed. Best cake we've ever made. Victoria thanked him and walked out carrying herself with the calm confidence of someone who belonged there. Ava quickly turned away before being noticed. She returned to her crate near the kitchen entrance and sat down. The paper cup of lemonade was still cold in her hands. She told herself it was none of her business. Grown-ups did strange things all the time. Yet something continued to bother her. 10 minutes later Sarah finally returned. You okay, baby? She asked while tying on a fresh apron. Ava nodded, then hesitated. Manga. Sarah was already checking a catering list. Yeah. Ava glanced toward the preparation room. Why would someone paint a cake after it's already finished? Sarah looked up briefly. Paint a cake. With a little brush. Sarah smiled tiredly. Probably adding details. Rich people pay a lot for details. Then her phone vibrated. Another kitchen emergency. Another missing tray. Another request from upstairs. The conversation ended before it began. Ava watched her mother disappear again into the crowd of staff. Around noon the ballroom became busier. Florists adjusted centerpieces. Photographers tested lighting. Guests began arriving. Ava wandered only as far as she was allowed. While passing a service station near the ballroom entrance, she noticed something else. A wedding coordinator handed Victoria a printed schedule. The bride glanced at it and immediately folded the paper in half before slipping it into her purse. Nothing unusual about that, except one corner remained visible. Ava could read only 3 words before Victoria covered them with her hand. Private tasting groom. The little girl kept walking. 30 minutes later she passed the same hallway again. The preparation room door stood open now. The cake remained untouched. The silver flower was still there. But another detail had changed. A small white card sat beside the cake stand. Ava stepped closer. The card read, Reserved slice, Ethan Caldwell. She frowned. The mark on the diagram pointed to the exact section beneath the silver flower. There you are. Ava jumped slightly. An older server smiled at her. Your mom's been looking for you. Ava nodded and walked away. Yet her stomach felt strange now. Not scared. Not exactly. More like the feeling she got when she finished a puzzle and realized one piece belonged somewhere else. Later that afternoon rain tapped softly against the tall ballroom windows. Guests laughed. Glasses clinked. Somewhere in the distance a spoon struck the side of a coffee cup. Everything looked perfect. Too perfect. Then Ava noticed Victoria again. The bride stood near the stage speaking with a man in a dark suit. Their conversation appeared casual, friendly, ordinary. But when Victoria noticed someone approaching, she abruptly stopped talking. The man handed her a phone. She read something on the screen. Her smile disappeared, only for a second. Then she deleted the message and gave the phone back. Most people would never have noticed. Ava did, because she had been watching. A few minutes later, the man left through a side exit. As he pushed open the door, a gust of wind lifted a folded paper from his jacket pocket and dropped it onto the floor. Nobody saw it except Ava. She waited until the hallway emptied before picking it up. It wasn't a letter. It wasn't a receipt. It was a seating chart for the wedding reception. One name had been crossed out in black ink. Beneath it, written by hand, were 3 words that made Ava's chest tighten. Reserved slice groom. The paper trembled slightly in Ava's hands as cold air drifted through the service hallway. She looked at the words again. Reserved slice groom. The same phrase she had seen earlier beside the wedding cake. The same phrase written by hand after another name had been crossed out. She did not fully understand what it meant, but she understood enough to know it was not supposed to happen twice. A voice echoed from the ballroom. Guests were arriving faster now. Music floated through the open doors. Ava folded the paper carefully and slipped it into the pocket of her sweater. Then she went looking for her mother. She found Sarah carrying a tray of sparkling water glasses near the ballroom entrance. Mama. Sarah glanced over while walking. Not now, baby. I found something. Later. It's important. Sarah stopped just long enough to see the seriousness in her daughter's eyes. But before Ava could explain, a wedding coordinator rushed over holding a clipboard. Sarah, we need you in the East Service Station immediately. The moment disappeared. Sarah squeezed Ava's shoulder gently and hurried away. Ava remained standing alone among people who were all busy with things that felt more important than hers. A few minutes later, she wandered toward the ballroom stage. The wedding photographer was testing camera angles. Florists adjusted arrangements. Near the front row, Ethan Caldwell stood with two executives from his company. In photographs, he always looked larger than life. In person, he looked tired. Not weak, not old. Just tired in a way expensive suits could not hide. While the men talked, Ethan's phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen and frowned. One of the executives asked a question. Ethan never answered. Instead, he stared at the notification for another second before locking the screen and slipping the phone away. Most people would have forgotten it immediately. Ava noticed something else. A moment later, Victoria approached him. "Everything okay?" she asked warmly. Ethan hesitated. "Did you change tonight's tasting schedule?" Victoria's smile appeared instantly, almost too instantly. "Of course," she said. "The bakery recommended it." Ethan nodded slowly. "I don't remember approving it." "You were busy," she replied with a soft laugh. "You approve 100 things every day." The conversation sounded normal, perfectly normal, yet something about it felt rehearsed. Victoria touched his arm. Ethan relaxed slightly. The moment passed, but Ava remembered every word. An hour later, the ballroom was nearly full. Crystal chandeliers reflected off polished marble floors. Waiters moved between tables carrying silver trays. Ava sat quietly near a side wall, watching. She pulled the folded paper from her pocket again. This time she noticed something she had missed before. In the bottom corner was a timestamp from the hotel's printing system. 11:47 a.m. Ava frowned. She looked at the giant clock above the ballroom entrance. It now read 3:12 p.m. The seating chart had been changed only a few hours earlier. Not weeks ago, not days ago, today. Someone had altered it the same day as the wedding. Her attention shifted when she heard familiar voices nearby. Victoria was speaking to the same man in the dark suit she had met earlier. They stood partially hidden behind a decorative column. "Did you get rid of the first version?" the man asked quietly. "Victoria nodded. There isn't a first version anymore." "Good." Ava could not hear the rest. A group of guests walked between them. By the time they passed, the conversation had ended. The man was gone. Victoria was smiling at arriving guests as if nothing had happened. Then Ava noticed one final detail. As Victoria lifted her champagne glass, her sleeve slid back for just a second. Wrapped around her wrist was a thin white adhesive band, the kind hospitals often placed over an foresight after a blood draw or injection. It looked fresh, very fresh, and when Ava glanced toward the ballroom entrance, she saw the same white adhesive wrapper sticking halfway out of a trash can beside the preparation room where the cake had been left alone. The white adhesive wrapper remained lodged in the edge of the trash can, barely visible beneath a stack of paper napkins. Ava stared at it for a long moment. She was not old enough to understand why a bride might have a fresh medical bandage on her wrist. She only knew it belonged in the same mental box as the silver flower, the tiny vial, the changed schedule, and the words reserved slice groom. None of them made sense alone. Together they felt heavy. She stepped toward the trash can. A polished black shoe appeared beside it before she could reach down. "Can I help you?" The voice was pleasant, professional. Ava looked up. One of the hotel's security supervisors stood over her. He wore an earpiece and a perfectly pressed suit. "That area is for staff only." Ava pointed toward the wrapper. "I just wanted to see something." The man glanced at the trash can, without interest. "Then let's leave it there." His smile never disappeared. Neither did the warning hidden inside it. A few minutes later, Ava finally found her mother near the ballroom kitchen. Sarah was carrying 2 trays at once. Her face already showed the strain of a 14-hour shift. "Mama, I need to tell you something." Sarah slowed. "Honey, not right now. It's about the cake." The words made Sarah stop. What about the cake? Before Ava could answer, another voice entered the conversation. Is there a problem? Victoria Langford stood only a few feet away. Her wedding gown shimmered under the chandelier light. Her smile looked warm enough for a magazine cover. Ava suddenly understood how easy it would be for adults to believe Victoria instead of her. Sarah straightened immediately. No, ma'am. Everything's fine. Victoria's eyes settled on Ava. You must be Sarah's daughter. Ava nodded. I've seen you walking around today. Victoria crouched slightly so they were almost eye level. To anyone watching, it looked kind, gentle, the perfect bride speaking to a child. Big events can be confusing, Victoria said softly. Sometimes we think we see things that aren't really important. Ava said nothing. You understand that, right? Sarah shifted uncomfortably beside her. The question sounded harmless. It did not feel harmless. Ava tightened her fingers around the folded seating chart hidden inside her pocket. I know what I saw. For the first time, Victoria's smile changed. Not much, just enough. It became thinner. I'm sure you believe that. Then she stood. Sarah, the wedding starts in less than an hour. We need everyone focused. Of course, ma'am. Victoria walked away. The smile returned before she reached the next guest. Sarah exhaled slowly. Ava. Mama. She was in the room with the cake. Honey. Sarah lowered her voice. Listen to me carefully. She glanced around before continuing. People like us don't get second chances in places like this. Ava looked at the marble floors, the crystal lights, the men in tailored suits worth more than a year's rent. She understood exactly what her mother meant. One complaint, one misunderstanding, one accusation. Sarah could lose everything. Promise me you won't cause trouble. Ava did not answer right away. Across the ballroom, she spotted Ethan Caldwell greeting guests. He looked calm, confident, completely unaware. Nearby, two board members were discussing stock prices. A string quartet began playing near the stage. The entire room seemed built to make people like Ava disappear. Then something unexpected happened. Ethan glanced across the ballroom. For a brief moment, his eyes landed on Ava. Not because he knew her, not because he cared what she thought, simply because she was standing there. And in that moment, Victoria stepped between them. Smoothly, naturally, like someone adjusting her position in a crowded room. Yet she remained there just long enough to block his view. Then she smiled and guided him toward a group of photographers. Most people would never have noticed. Ava did. And when Victoria turned away, something slipped from the bride's hand into the pocket of her bouquet ribbon. A small folded label. White cardstock. The same kind that sat beside the wedding cake. And printed across the top in neat black letters were the words "Reserved Slice Groom." The words stayed in Ava's mind long after Victoria disappeared into the crowd. Reserved Slice Groom. She had now seen the phrase 3 times. Once beside the cake. Once on the altered seating chart. And now hidden inside the ribbon wrapped around the bride's bouquet. Rich people spent fortunes on weddings. They printed menus, schedules, guest lists, place cards. But nobody printed the exact same instruction 3 separate times unless it mattered. The ballroom lights dimmed slightly as the ceremony drew closer. Guests began finding their seats. A wedding planner spoke quietly into a headset. Somewhere near the stage, a violinist tested a final note. Ava remained near the sidewall, watching. Then she saw something she had not expected. Ethan Caldwell was alone. For the first time all afternoon, nobody stood beside him. No photographers. No executives. No wedding staff. He had stepped into a quieter corridor just outside the ballroom, phone in hand. He looked exhausted. Ava hesitated. Her mother had warned her, stay out of it. Don't cause trouble. But every time she tried to listen, another piece appeared. Another thing that didn't fit. Before she could lose her nerve, she crossed the hallway. Ethan looked up as her footsteps approached. His expression showed polite confusion. Hey there. Ava stopped several feet away. Sir. Ethan lowered his phone. Yes. She reached into her sweater pocket and carefully unfolded the seating chart. "I think this belongs to your wedding." Ethan accepted the paper automatically. At first he glanced at it the same way people glance at misplaced receipts. Then his eyes stopped moving. He looked again, slower this time. Ava watched his face change almost imperceptibly. Not shock, not fear, something quieter. Calculation. The crossed-out name caught his attention immediately. Then the handwritten note beneath it. "Reserved slice groom." Ethan frowned. "Where did you get this?" "A man dropped it." "What man?" "The one who was talking to Miss Victoria." Ethan looked up. "When?" "After lunch." His eyes returned to the paper. The hallway remained silent except for the distant music drifting from the ballroom. Then his phone vibrated. Ethan ignored it. Ava noticed that. Most adults checked their phones instantly. He didn't. Instead, he studied the timestamp in the corner. 11:47 a.m. His thumb rested over the printed numbers. "That's strange," he murmured. Not to Ava, to himself. "What's strange?" Ethan hesitated. "This version shouldn't exist." Ava said nothing. Ethan folded the paper once, carefully, like something fragile. Then he slipped it into the inside pocket of his jacket. The phone vibrated again. This time he looked at the screen. A message from Victoria appeared briefly before disappearing behind the lock screen. "Where are you? The tasting starts in 10 minutes. Ethan stared at the words for a moment. Then another memory surfaced. Ava could see it happen. His eyes shifted slightly. His attention moved somewhere far away. "The tasting," he said quietly. "What?" Ava asked. Ethan looked back at her. A few weeks ago, Victoria insisted on changing the cake schedule. His voice remained calm. She said it would make the photographer's job easier. He almost smiled. "I never thought about it again." His gaze drifted toward the ballroom entrance. Until now, a wedding coordinator appeared at the far end of the corridor. "Mr. Caldwell? Everyone's ready." Ethan nodded automatically. The coordinator left. For several seconds, neither Ethan nor Ava moved. Then Ava remembered something else. Slowly, she reached into her second pocket. "There's one more thing." Ethan looked down. Ava placed a tiny object into his palm. The white adhesive wrapper she had recovered from beside the preparation room. Ethan turned it over. Most people would have thrown it away. He didn't. Printed across the back was a pharmacy label with a partial lot number and a timestamp. 11:52 a.m., 5 minutes after the seating chart had been changed. Ethan stared at the wrapper, then at the ballroom doors. And for the first time all day, he began to wonder whether the person he trusted most had been standing in the center of every clue. For several seconds, Ethan remained motionless, the small pharmacy wrapper resting in his palm like it weighed far more than paper should. The sounds of the wedding continued around them. Laughter, glasses clinking, a pianist testing a few notes near the ballroom stage. Everything looked exactly as it should. That was what troubled him most. "Thank you," he said quietly. Ava nodded. "I don't want anything." Ethan looked at her. Most people would have followed that sentence with a request. She didn't. "I just don't want my mom to get blamed if something bad happens." The words landed harder than she knew. Ethan slipped both the wrapper and the folded seating chart into his jacket pocket. Then he glanced toward the ballroom doors. "Go find your mother." Ava hesitated. "Are you going to tell Miss Victoria?" "Not yet." Something in his voice made her believe him. Across the hall, a catering cart rattled over the marble floor. A waiter hurried past carrying champagne flutes. Nobody noticed when Ethan stepped away from the ballroom and turned down a quieter corridor leading toward the hotel's executive offices. He did not call security. He did not confront Victoria. Instead, he made one phone call. "Richard." His attorney answered immediately. "Ethan, I need a favor." "Now?" Ethan looked through a glass window at the rain streaking the city skyline. "Especially now." 10 minutes later, he was standing alone in a small conference room usually reserved for corporate meetings. A single lamp glowed over the polished table. Rain tapped softly against the windows. His phone rested face down beside him. Richard appeared on a secure video call. Ethan held up the pharmacy wrapper. "Can you trace this lot number?" The attorney frowned. "Give me a minute." Ethan waited. He thought about the altered seating chart, the tasting schedule, the hidden label, the vial Ava claimed she had seen. Separately, each thing sounded ridiculous. Together, they formed a pattern he could no longer ignore. His phone vibrated.
Victoria.
He let it ring. A minute later, it vibrated again.
Victoria.
Then again. Richard finally spoke. "This is odd." Ethan looked up. "What?" "The lot number belongs to a compounded cardiac medication." Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. Medication for what? In high doses? Dangerous heart rhythm disruption. Silence filled the room. Rain continued tapping against the glass. Somewhere down the hall, an ice machine hummed. Richard studied another screen. "Why are you asking about this?" Ethan did not answer immediately. Instead, he opened his messages. Victoria had sent 3 texts in 12 minutes. "Where are you? Everyone's waiting. The tasting starts now. Call me." He stared at the second message. "The tasting starts now." Then another memory surfaced. 3 weeks earlier. Victoria insisting the tasting schedule be changed. Victoria personally choosing which slice he would sample for photographs. Victoria laughing when he told her she worried too much about details. Details. Suddenly the details were everywhere. A knock interrupted his thoughts. One of his longtime executive assistants stood at the door. "Mr. Caldwell?" "Yes. You asked me last month to archive event revisions for insurance purposes." Ethan nodded. "Can you pull the original wedding schedule?" "Of course." 5 minutes later she emailed it. Ethan opened the file. The original version appeared on his screen. His eyes moved slowly down the page, then stopped. The reserved tasting section had not existed in the first version. It had been added later, added by a user account belonging to Victoria Langford. Ethan leaned back in his chair. He closed his eyes briefly, not because the truth was proven, not yet, but because he suddenly realized something far worse. Every unusual detail from the past month had pointed in the same direction. And every time he had noticed one, he had accepted Victoria's explanation without a second thought. Ethan opened his eyes and looked at the original schedule one last time. Then he closed the file and stood. By the time he returned to the ballroom, nothing about his expression had changed. Guests still laughed beneath the chandeliers. Photographers still adjusted lenses. Victoria still looked flawless. Only Ava noticed the difference. Ethan was no longer confused. He was watching. Across the room, Victoria smiled when she saw him approach. "There you are." She touched his arm lightly. "Everyone's been waiting." Ethan smiled back. "Calm. Easy."
Sorry.
Business call. Relief flickered across her face so quickly most people would have missed it. Ava did not. Neither did Ethan. "Ready for the tasting?" Victoria asked. "Actually," Ethan said, "before we do that, I wanted to confirm something." Her smile remained in place. "Of course." Ethan turned toward a nearby event coordinator. "Could you bring me the original tasting layout?" The coordinator blinked. "The original one?" "Yes." A tiny pause followed. Victoria answered before anyone else could. "Why would we need that?" Her tone was light, curious, reasonable. Ethan shrugged. "Humor me." The coordinator hurried away. For the first time, Victoria's fingers tightened slightly around the stem of her champagne glass. Ava noticed. 5 minutes later, the coordinator returned carrying a folder. Ethan opened it on a nearby cocktail table. Guests continued mingling around them. Nobody paid much attention. Not yet. Ethan flipped through several pages. Then he stopped. "Interesting."
Victoria leaned closer.
"What?" Ethan pointed to a diagram. "This version doesn't show a reserved tasting slice." Victoria's eyes dropped to the page. Only for a second. Then she laughed softly. "Probably an early draft." Ethan nodded. "That's what I thought." He closed the folder. but instead of returning it, he left it lying open on the table. Face up, visible, like bait. A phone vibrated nearby. Nobody touched it. The sound seemed strangely loud beneath the music. Ava stood near a column watching everything. Her heart pounded. She still did not understand all of it. She only understood details. Small details. The kinds adults ignored. Then she remembered one. She crossed the room carefully and stopped beside Ethan. "Sir." Ethan glanced down. "Yes." The man with the paper. Victoria's shoulders stiffened almost imperceptibly. Ava continued. He held his keys in his right hand. Ethan waited. "And the hotel staff all carry theirs on the left side." Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly. "How do you know?" Ava pointed toward a row of employees moving through the ballroom. Every keycard clipped to the left. Every access badge hanging from the same side. "Because they have to scan doors." Silence. It sounded childish. Simple. Yet Ethan suddenly remembered something. The man Victoria had been meeting was not hotel staff. But he had walked through employee-only areas all afternoon. Access he should not have had. Ethan looked across the ballroom. The man was gone. Victoria spoke quickly. "Ethan, this is getting ridiculous. She's a child." "She is," Ethan agreed. His voice remained perfectly calm. "Which is why it's interesting that she notices things the rest of us don't." Victoria's smile faltered. "Not completely. Just enough." A camera light blinked from the back of the room. Somewhere a waiter dropped a fork. The metallic sound echoed briefly. Ethan picked up the tasting folder and handed it to his assistant. "One more thing," he said casually. "Can you pull the guest access logs for today?" Victoria turned toward him immediately. "Why?" There it was. The first real crack. Not anger. Not panic. Just a question that came too fast. Ethan looked at her quietly. Neither spoke for several seconds. Then he smiled. "Insurance documentation. You know how lawyers are." Victoria laughed. Nobody else joined her. And for the first time all day, when she looked toward Ava, it was not the look adults gave a child. It was the look someone gives a witness. The moment lasted only a second. But Ava saw it. And so did Ethan. In that instant, Victoria finally understood something she had not realized before. The little girl was no longer standing alone. Victoria's gaze moved from Ethan to Ava and back again. The ballroom suddenly felt smaller. Not because the room had changed, but because there were no longer any places left for the truth to hide. Ethan's assistant returned carrying a tablet. Behind her came Richard, Ethan's attorney, who had quietly arrived through a private entrance without attracting attention. Neither man looked alarmed. That made the moment more unsettling. Richard handed Ethan a small envelope. Ethan opened it and removed several printed pages. He read them without expression. Around them, guests continued talking, unaware that something invisible had shifted beneath the evening. Victoria's smile returned. "What is this?" she asked lightly. Ethan did not answer. Instead, he looked toward Ava. "You said you saw her near the cake room." Ava nodded. "Before lunch." "How sure are you?" The kitchen clock said 11:51. Several guests nearby overheard the exchange and turned toward them.
Victoria laughed softly.
"We're really doing this?" Ethan still did not raise his voice. "Actually, yes." Richard stepped forward and placed the tablet on a nearby table. A security video appeared on the screen. The image showed the service hallway outside the cake preparation room. The timestamp read 11:49 a.m. Victoria's expression remained calm. The hallway appeared empty. Then the footage advanced. At 11:50, Victoria entered the room carrying her purse. Nobody spoke. The video continued. 1 minute passed. Then another. At 11:57, she exited. Alone. Several guests exchanged confused looks. "That proves nothing," Victoria said immediately. "I was checking decorations." Ethan nodded slowly. "That's what I thought too." He touched the screen. A second video appeared. This one came from inside the preparation room. Victoria's face lost color. The room became completely silent. The camera angle showed the wedding cake, the silver flower, the table beside it, and Victoria standing alone. Nobody moved. Nobody coughed. Nobody even seemed to breathe. On screen, Victoria removed a small vial from her purse. Then she lifted the silver flower and carefully applied something beneath it. The ballroom remained frozen. The footage ended. For several seconds, Ethan simply stared at the dark screen. Ava looked toward him. The billionaire who controlled corporations worth billions suddenly looked like a man who had misplaced years of his life. Victoria opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again. "It's medication." Her voice sounded different now. "I wasn't poisoning anything." Richard calmly placed another document on the table. "The lab disagrees." Ethan looked down. The preliminary analysis from the pharmacy lot number matched the substance recovered from residue beneath the flower decoration. Dangerous in concentrated quantities. Dangerous enough that nobody in the room could dismiss it as a misunderstanding. Victoria's hands trembled. Only slightly, but Ava saw it. Ethan saw it too. Then Ava remembered something. One small thing everyone else had missed. She stepped forward. "The message." Victoria turned sharply. Ava pointed toward the phone still resting in Victoria's hand. "The one you deleted after talking to the man." Richard exchanged a glance with Ethan. Without a word, he placed another page on the table. A recovered phone backup. One text message highlighted near the center. "Tonight everything ends." The recipient's number matched the man who had entered restricted areas using unauthorized access credentials. Ethan read the message once, then again. His face drained of color. Not because of the cake. Not because of the money. Because suddenly every explanation he had accepted, every warning he had ignored, every moment he had chosen trust over doubt stood together in one place. He looked toward Sarah Brooks standing near the back of the room, still wearing her service uniform. He looked toward Ava. The child security had nearly removed. The child everyone had dismissed. Then he looked at
Victoria.
For the first time all evening, he saw her without the story he had built around her. The silence stretched across the ballroom. Finally, Ethan removed the folded seating chart from his jacket pocket, placed it carefully on the table beside the lab report and recovered message, then turned to Richard. His voice was calm enough to chill the room. "Call my attorney. We're done here." No one moved for several seconds after Ethan spoke. The ballroom that had been filled with music, laughter, and expensive promises now felt strangely hollow. Victoria looked around as if searching for someone who could still fix this. Nobody stepped forward. Not the guests. Not the planners. Not the executives. The story she had carefully built was collapsing under the weight of facts that no longer depended on anyone believing her. Richard quietly contacted the appropriate authorities and preserved every document, message, and recording. The wedding never resumed. The engagement ended that night. Within weeks, investigators confirmed the evidence trail. The altered schedules, unauthorized access records, recovered messages, and laboratory findings triggered a formal inquiry. Several financial arrangements connected to Victoria and her associate came under review. People who had once rushed to stand beside her now avoided cameras and attorneys alike. The consequences arrived slowly, but they arrived. That mattered more than drama. Truth did not need to shout. It only needed to remain standing. For Sarah Brooks, the changes felt smaller at first. 2 days after the wedding, she received a call from the hotel's ownership group. Not a termination notice. An apology. Her employment record was reviewed. The supervisors who had dismissed her concerns admitted she had been treated unfairly during the event. She was offered a permanent management track position with full benefits and a salary that no longer required endless double shifts. Sarah cried only after she hung up the phone. She sat at her kitchen table staring at the letter for nearly 10 minutes before realizing it was real. Ava watched from across the room and smiled. She had never cared about fancy ballrooms. She cared that her mother could finally sleep. Ethan changed too. Not all at once. Some lessons arrive quietly. He spent weeks reviewing practices across his companies and charitable foundations. He discovered how often important voices were ignored simply because they came from the wrong neighborhood, the wrong job title, or the wrong side of a service door. Policies changed. Reporting systems changed. Staff protections expanded. Several executives were removed after audits revealed patterns of neglect that had existed for years. Ethan used his influence differently now. Not to protect appearances, to protect people. One afternoon he invited Sarah and Ava to a small gathering at the same hotel.
No cameras. No reporters.
No speeches prepared by public relations teams. Just a few employees, managers, and people who had witnessed what happened. On a table near the front stood a simple glass display case. Inside rested the silver sugar flower from the wedding cake. Beside it sat a small plaque. It did not mention scandal. It did not mention wealth. It read, "The truth matters no matter who speaks it." Ethan stood before the room. "Many of us saw the cake," he said quietly. Only one person paid attention. Then he turned toward Ava. In front of everyone, he thanked her by name. Not as a hero, not as a symbol, as a person who had refused to stay silent when silence would have been easier. Later that evening, after the guests had gone home, Ethan drove Sarah and Ava back to their apartment. Rain tapped softly against the windshield. The city lights blurred across the glass. When they arrived, Ava stepped out carrying a new backpack filled with books from a scholarship program Ethan had arranged. Before going inside, she looked back at him. "Mr. Caldwell?" "Yes." Ava thought for a moment. "You finally listened." Ethan could not answer right away. He simply nodded. The apartment window glowed warmly behind her. Sarah held the door open. Ava disappeared inside. And for the first time in a very long time, Ethan understood that the most powerful person in the room is not always the one who speaks the loudest, but the one willing to tell the truth when everyone else would rather look away.